Hi there, welcome to IndyCar on the 11th of July. Now, I'm not going to go on about news stories today, but I thought it might be an interesting exercise to give you something of a history lesson. Now, the history of the Scottish Parliament, and I'm not talking about the one in Edinburgh at the moment, but the Scottish Parliament generally is largely unknown, especially since the signing of the Acts of Union. In 1707, when the Acts of Union were signed, as I've mentioned before, there were certain conditions placed on the treaty by Scottish negotiators, and those conditions had to be adhered to at all times, otherwise the Union Treaty would become null and void. And one of those, as you may have heard me mentioning on the previous programmes, is the fact that Scottish sovereignty remains with the people. It's also not written into the Treaty of Union at all about the future of the Scottish Parliament. But what actually happened was, during the Treaty of Union, after it happened, the Scottish Parliament was essentially temporarily suspended, and all of the decision-making power was vested in a small number of MPs, Scottish MPs, who were elected and would sit in the chamber at Westminster. What was not decided, and this is the important thing to remember here, is that cohort of Scottish MPs did not become part of the United Kingdom government. It became a part of the chamber in which that parliament sat. Now, in that parliament, for over 316 years, there have been two parliaments sitting simultaneously. The English Parliament, which of course assumed that the Scots, having joined them, meant that they had actually become a part of the English Parliament, and the Scottish Parliament itself, which was a discrete body sitting alongside the English Parliament in the same chamber. And those two national parliaments would only take decisions where it was in the joint interests of both countries to do so. In other words, when they were acting as one unit. And that largely was the case for the whole of the 316 years. And because of that, the English, I think the monarchy and also the English Parliament itself assumed that it would never actually need to abolish the old Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh at all, simply because they believed that the Scots MPs, numbering, well, now only 59, would always be outvoted on anything of great importance to the English Parliament. And that has largely been the way things turned out. However, that's not the actual constitutional position at all. In all of the 316 years, according to the conditions of the Union Treaty itself, the sovereignty of the Scottish people has remained intact, and all of that 316 years, including the time before the new Holyrood Parliament opened, the Scottish Parliament had not been abolished. It was simply suspended in Edinburgh and was now sitting in London alongside the English elected Parliament. The English Parliament assumed that that meant that they had sovereignty over Scotland, and because the Scottish MPs were sitting in their chamber, that somehow that gave them the right to overrule the Scots on matters of Scottish interest. And I'm talking about territorial interest, I'm talking about natural resources, I'm talking about defence and foreign affairs. But the truth is interesting. The truth is that the Scottish Parliament, and I'm not talking about the one we currently have in Edinburgh, but the one which is still sitting, or will still be sitting, in London in the next year, basically, when they go back, that Parliament, that 59 group cohort of Scottish MPs, is actually our national decision-making body. It's fully empowered to make decisions on anything of Scottish national interest, and it is fully empowered, incidentally, to walk out of the chamber and come back up to Scotland and reconvene a fully empowered Scottish Parliament with their own presence. The Parliament, which was created by the Labour Party essentially, but also agreed by John Major before Labour came in, the Parliament that currently sits in Edinburgh is actually illegal because it assumed, or the English government, which assumed power over Scotland, thought that they had the sovereignty to devolve to a Scottish Parliament. But that's not the case. The sovereignty was never missing in the first place, and that sovereignty rests with those 59 MPs to this day. So at any point during the last 316 years, our Scottish MPs could have taken that sovereignty themselves, walked out and said, the Union Treaty is over, you've broken it. And they could point to a number of major breaches of the treaty conditions. But I think the most fundamental one, and the one that everybody is probably most angry about, is the theft of natural resources from Scotland's territorial waters, particularly oil and gas, which have lost Scotland trillions of dollars worth of income, which has basically been pinched by the English Parliament. The English government has basically just gone in there and hoovered that stuff out of there and sold it off and profited from it without there being any permission given by the Union Treaty. In no part of the Union Treaty does it say that the Scots have transferred ownership of their natural resources to the English Parliament in London. At no point did they give them authority to sell off anything which was a natural Scottish resource, including our water, incidentally. So it's an interesting point to conjure with, but it's not just a historical artifact. This is not just, oh, it's all in the past and it doesn't matter anymore. This is current, and this is the current lawful position in Scotland, that our MPs could, by simply having a vote to do so, walk out of that chamber in London, come back up to Edinburgh and reconvene a fully empowered Scottish Parliament, which has nothing to do with devolution whatsoever. They could kick out all of the Unionist MSPs from that Parliament as agents of a foreign power. All of this is still lawful, and because the English were so lazy and so arrogant that they thought they didn't need to do anything about the Scottish Parliament, they didn't need to abolish it, they never ever did it. They assumed that they would be able to outvote the Scots and it wouldn't be necessary. But that oversight is going to cost them, because at the end of the day, the people of Scotland can decide, if they wish, to simply instruct their own elected officials, their MPs in Westminster, to come back to Edinburgh to reconvene the ancient Scottish Parliament, fully empowered to do so, incidentally, under the condition of the Union, which is the Scots' sovereignty. And if we, as the sovereign Scots, decide to do that and instruct and order our politicians to do that, then under our constitution, they must obey us, because to do anything else is actually unlawful. They would be breaking their own Scots law by refusing to do so. So this creates an interesting situation in Scotland. There is a huge opportunity here for the people of Scotland themselves to get together and actually tell their own elected officials to stop messing around in London, come back up here and reconvene the Scottish Parliament right away, throw out the devolved assembly completely, get rid of all of the Unionist MSPs who currently are infesting the place, and reconvene it as a proper Scottish constitutional decision-taking place. A place where Scots lawmakers decide what Scots do, where we can, at a stroke, rejoin the European Union if we wanted, join the European Free Trade Association if we wanted, join NATO if we wanted, get rid of nuclear weapons if we wanted, and do anything else that any normal country is normally able to do. The problem is that the people of Scotland and all its politicians, even its historians and many of its learned legal minds, have actually been gaslit for 316 years into believing that the Scottish Parliament was abolished, when it never was. It was simply suspended. The Parliament in Edinburgh at the moment is controlled by London. As soon as our 59 MPs vote in majority to return home, they can simply come back to Holyrood, declare the Union over, devolution at an end, and take back full powers in the name of the Scottish sovereign people, who would have to instruct them to do so. It's an almost unique political situation for any country, for its people to be able to do this, but that is the fact of Scotland, and that is the fact that the British state has tried its best for 316 years to conceal from the people who live in Scotland that they've always had this right, They've just not been told about it, and they've been distracted by joining in the adventures of the United Kingdom and the Great British Empire over 300 years, and being involved in their exploitation of other people in other countries in order to make money. And that is exactly what the United Kingdom has been doing all this time. But now the United Kingdom is down on its uppers and is struggling to make ends meet, where it has a massive debt burden, where it has no way out of its debt burden. And you may have noticed, I don't know if anyone's reported it recently, but the pound has slid down in value against the dollar to $1.10. It's almost worth just $1. Many years ago, a pound would have been worth over $2, but it's been gradually losing ground. And so things are more expensive. It's much more expensive for people to buy stuff from abroad, including food, and that's driving up prices, etc., etc. So we have this unique power. All we have to do is tell our own politicians to end the union right now, come home, and let's get on with having a proper referendum of our own where we can decide whether or not we want this union to continue. But our own 59 MPs could quite easily decide to suspend the union temporarily until they give the Scots the opportunity to vote on it. And that is really what must happen. And interestingly, sometime around the middle of this month, in the next week or so, there will be some interesting announcements about things like this. So watch out for your news feeds, because things are about to change big time in the political landscape of Scotland. I'll give you more information on what's going on and some more interesting little tidbits about what to expect later this month, probably next week. But in the meantime, be of good cheer. Things are about to change for the better in Scotland, and the powers that we thought we didn't have are still there. I'll see you soon. Bye bye for now.